Good morning. I hope you're all well and safe and things are calm in Kiev. I'm hoping that you are having a good conference, and I apologize that I couldn't be there. I decided that I would just speak over the slides rather than torture you with a talking head that may or may not be visible. So what I'm going to be talking about today is a quick overview of what MT options are available today, what are the most important determinants of success with MT, and really get into some detail on what customization means and what control and management values are necessary to really be successful with that. I want to touch on the important return on investment implications, because it's not worth doing MT if it doesn't actually improve your business in some way or improve your productivity in some way. And I'll also point out, based on experiences that we have had at Asia Online, some of the critical factors that determine success beyond just the MT system itself. Today we see that MT is pervasive and easily available all over the place. You have Google and Microsoft, and they're estimated between 250 and 500 million users every day. So we've already reached a point where 99.9% of translation in the world today is done by computers. But MT does not have as deep a penetration in the professional translation world. And in the professional translation world, we really see two kinds of MT implementations. We have these instant custom MT options where you throw some data into through a web interface typically, and you hope that it will produce something useful. And sometimes it does, most often it does not. And then you have a range of expert MT systems and developers who help various kinds of professional users on how to make MT work for them. It's important to understand that MT is something that has to be adjusted for different purposes. And it's interesting to see that the most common purpose that is used in the professional translation world is where it's most difficult for MT to deliver, the right level of service. MT is very good for real-time translation of inter-office chat and knowledge bases and just massive amounts of content that just would not get translated. So it has clearly a value there. It has less value in really high quality translations where it's very important that it doesn't look like it was done by a computer, and you need much more skill to do that. So it's important to understand what we mean by MT customization. Basically, it's adapting an MT engine or an MT system to minimize the amount of post-editing required to make it look like it was done by human beings. It's adjusting an MT engine so that it translates more in context of what you really want it to do. And the objective is to produce the highest possible MT output quality so that translation work gets done faster and at lower cost. This seems obvious to some people, but it's amazing how often this is overlooked. It's not just a matter of dropping data in and just instantly getting some kind of engine. So what happens when you do customization? You have here a chart with 5 columns that describe the language, gives you the source data in the second column, a human translation in the third column, what a customized MT system will produce, and what an uncustomized MT system might produce. So this chart shows you something about what customization means, so that it gets closer to what the human translation would be. That's basically the objective. And getting high quality MT output is a complicated process. It requires time, effort, and especially skill. It is not a matter of just throwing data up into a web portal and then pushing a button and then starting to translate. It's not an instant process. If you want high quality, you're going to have to make some kind of effort, and you're going to have to understand what you're doing. We have a growing momentum in this do-it-yourself MT customization arena, and there are people that succeed, and the ones that succeed are the ones that make the knowledge and skill investments and then learn how to clean the data to do the value add stuff that automated processes cannot do. It's important to understand that any kind of instant MT solution is not going to be able to read your mind on what you want, like in terms of writing style and target audience, very specific requirements that your translations might have. And oftentimes the people that are building the systems don't know what the right data is. So they're throwing in all kinds of data. So if you're building a system for IT, for example, and you're throwing in Europarl data, the chances are very high that you're not going to get a good system. So sometimes it's better to leave out some kinds of data. So what we see today with the do-it-yourself MT approach is that the ease of use, in terms of just throwing data in and pushing a button and getting something, hides the complexity and hides the fact that you don't have a lot of key controls that are necessary to raise MT output quality. And also, a basic assumption made is that, whether you're using some commercial service or you're using Moses, is that you know how to do it. For those of you who have tried, you may understand that it actually is much more complicated and it requires much more investment in terms of understanding data, in terms of understanding the tools, in terms of just how do I respond when things don't work out the way you want it. So, today we have a world where it's very easy to create some kind of an engine, but most of the time these engines are very low quality. So it's useful now to take a look at what the impact of the MT quality has to the productivity, to overall productivity. So if you look at a free online engine, you see that, and these are very rough comparisons I've made, but it gives you some perspective on what we're dealing with in terms of relative quality. So if you take the free online engines, they're actually not so bad in some of the Romance languages. They get worse and worse as the further you get away from English in terms of linguistic similarities. And so they're terrible with Asian languages. They're not that great with Russian, as far as I know. And so, a free online engine will give you, on average, when you send 1,000 sentences through, you'll find that maybe 15% to 40% of them, are usable in some, they look like a fuzzy match. A low quality Moses system, and, we should understand that less than 5% of these systems can outperform the free engines. So most times, the Google or the Microsoft system is going to do better than most Moses systems that are built. So it's, there's really no point to building the Moses system if you can get better quality from the free online system. But in terms of expert systems, we're seeing, and this is the Asia Online experience, that the productivity ranges from 5,000 to like 12 to 15,000 words a day. And the better the system, the higher the individual segment that comes out. So if you took a random set of 1,000 segments from the system, you'll find that 80 to 90% of them look like high fuzzy matches. And and this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get the average output of the MT system as high as possible. It's important to understand that this is a process. It's a refinement process. It's a process that requires iteration, so that you go in, you produce something. So you may start with your first cut of the engine might actually be worse than if you had just done it with human translation. But as you start providing more feedback, as you start tuning in more clearly to what the system is supposed to do, you will find that it produces more and more useful segments that actually speed up the production process. And over time, you'll find that while MT is very rarely going to be a replacement for human translation, it can greatly enhance and speed up the process and reduce the overall cost, as this chart shows. So the reason why people keep trying to do it with MT is that when it works, it definitely does do two things. It helps you get work done faster, and it helps you get work done cheaper. And the same work that you would typically do through a standard human, translate, edit, proof process. So in this case here, I have a 500,000 word project, and these are all hypothetical costs. They're just indicative to give you some sense of what the financial impact can be. So you see here that if you were to do it through a pure human process, you would have a cost of $75,000, 200 man days necessary to do it. And then you see the range of expert systems. So the best expert systems could do it at less than half the cost in a quarter of the time. And then depending on the quality of the system, so even not such a great Moses system is going to save money. And so this is why so many people are trying. And so let's get into what affects custom engine quality. There are many factors, and the Asia Online website goes into great detail on the many, many things that affect the quality of an engine. But the most important things are the complexity of the language pair you're working and the subject domain. It's easier to get good quality MT with very technical domains or very clearly focused domains than domains that don't have any focus. Romance languages are easier than Asian languages. The hardest languages are languages like Japanese, Korean, Finnish. Russian is also up there. It's not as hard as Japanese and Korean, but it's considered one of the more difficult ones. The quality of the data you're working with at the source level, the TM that you're working with, how closely your TM is related to the domain that you're focused on, and the amount of effort you put into the initial customization effort you make to basically streamline the process. We need to understand that developing an MT engine is similar to building a production line. And so it's important that you have, that you apply the same kinds of thinking that you would to a production line, because it's going to be used over and over again. So you want to have some care taken through the whole sequence of processes. So when you look, you see there's different kinds of data that are involved. The data is collected and they're cleaned and prepared in a way to make sure that the MT engines, the learning technologies, the machine learning technologies can process it. That data prep, data cleaning process is a critical process to getting high quality, and requires lots of skill, lots of experience. The more you do it, the deeper your experience and the deeper your understanding. Then once you produce an engine and you start looking at the kinds of errors you're making, there are some errors that are easier to fix than others, and you start focusing on that. So basically there's four kinds of data that go into a customized engine. There is foundation data that like a vendor like Asia Online would provide to you. There is your specific domain foundation, and there's client data, and there's data that is manufactured, to basically fill in gaps and voids in the MT system so that it produces better quality output. A high quality engine is as much about what data is not in the engine as it is about what data is in the engine. So as I said before, if you're building an MT system that involves computers and information technology, you probably don't want to be using Europarl data, which is the most easily found parallel data on the web today. But a lot of people that build Moses systems use it, and so they have difficulty getting quality that's acceptable. So there are common sense principles. Make sure the data is clean and validated. It's from trusted sources, that it's balanced. You don't have all, like, if you have, of an old product that was popular, but all the new translations are going to be about a new product where the terminology has changed. So you need to understand these kinds of things and make these adjustments. There's the basic translation memory and target language monolingual data. This is the critical data that is necessary. If you have style guides, if you have other glossaries and dictionaries and lists of non-translatable terms, all these things add to the quality of the system. As I said earlier, the MT system development process is an evolutionary process. And once you feed your data through, you start at the bottom of this chart, where at the bottom left, if you look, where you see that you've got like about 40, 50, 45% that looks correct. That's, it's useful. And then once you start looking at some of the error patterns, you'll find that spelling and terminology errors are the easiest to fix. And that's probably step one in terms of where you focus. And then you look for targeted corrections of where the engine just learned the wrong things. Maybe there was stuff in your TM, since you can't actually read every individual piece of TM, you may just learn things that don't make, that are not valuable anymore. And then human feedback, as you send back post-edited corrections, you'll find that you get more and more correct. And and the objective is to get to a point as much green as possible. And that. So again, there's 4 kinds of data that go into an MT engine. You have basic language pair foundation data, then you have domain foundation. So like just if it's information technology, that's specific information technology language and translation memory goes in. And then the client's data, and then manufactured data. And all these add up together to produce a custom engine, a high quality custom engine. The data manufacturing is a critical element to producing high quality MT output. It involves finding where the MT system just doesn't know what to do, doing unknown word analysis, especially for Slavic languages. Inflected form creation is a critical element to get the quality levels higher. We have seen that with Hungarian, with Czech, with Russian, that this effort produces huge dividends and makes the MT output much more easily post-editable. So there's a whole set of tools that Asia Online provides and all will use on your behalf, depending on how involved clients want to get, that allow you to build and tune and make the engine better. And oftentimes the manufactured data is the data that gets you over those quality humps. So for here's an example of a data manufacturing. The MT produces a wrong sentence that goes like the quick brown fox over jumps the lazy dog. So when you correct jumps over, it is possible to use these tools to also find many other examples of where the phrase jumps over is used. And these phrases are fed back in, and thus you basically teach the computer that jumps over is the way you generally want to use it. And again, the impact is that you have better MT output that is more easily editable, that is closer to a human reference. So let me talk a little bit about what clean data statistical machine translation is about, because it's important to understand, and there's a lot of misinformation in the market, even in industry publications like Multilingual. They've produced several articles which are just, I think, really misinformed and provide lots of incorrect information. So a clean data engine is more than just a data built with TM. It's one where you have the ability to define and refine the writing style and choose preferred terminology. So it is also very important that all the data used in building the engine must be refinable or adjustable. A lot of times when you're doing these instant engines, or if you use Microsoft's Hub, for example, 95% of the data that goes into your engine, you have no control over. So your ability to really tune that engine to go a certain way is very limited. It's important, of course, to have high quality in-domain data, and the better that data is, the the better the output will be. And cleaning data is a process that requires human cognition and feedback. Translators have to be involved. They have to tell you that this data is good, this data is bad, or this is a low quality translation. Let's remove this set of TM. Those human judgments are necessary to produce better MT. So this ability to control many of the elements that you would also have in a typical human translation project, same elements are at work in getting a good MT engine out as well. And the more granular you can get on your subdomain, the better the impact will be on the productivity. So for example, if you look at what is possible, when you're building an English to Spanish engine, if you just went to Google, then what you get is what you get. And if you're trying to do automotive something, it may or may not do well. In Spanish, it may actually do well. It may not do so well in Russian or Polish or Czech or other languages or definitely not in Japanese and Korean. And so as you get more granular, you're going to find that the quality of the MT output gets better. So if you teach it the difference in style between Honda and Toyota, or the difference in style between a user manual for a car or an engineering service manual for a car, this is one for a motorbike, then you're going to find that as you get more granular, the ability of the system to produce better quality output gets better and better. It's important, again, I want to stress this point, that you need total control of all the data that goes into building your custom MT engine. So you must be able to adjust, refine, modify every single sentence that goes into building your engine. If you can't do it, if you can't control all of it, then you're at the mercy, and the errors that are produced by these systems can be quite random, and that you have no idea how to remove or fix. And so then it just becomes, you either control it when you build the engine, or you just have a much more difficult post-editing job. So you have to understand that there's a trade-off, that the more effort you put into building the engine up front, the easier the post-editing effort is. And it's important to keep that in mind. And another important factor is that when you use clean data-based models, it's very easy to remove bad patterns, because small amounts of data can correct error patterns that you're seeing. When you're just using random data that you don't know, much of that data being dirty data, you will find that it's very hard to get any kind of control over what your engine is doing. So again, to give you a sense of what the impact can be, we have seen that as you go from just building, say, an general English-Spanish engine to an automotive one, the productivity impact can go from as little as 20% to as much as 300% as you get more and more granular. So there's great value in going deeper and improving your focus, because the linguistic behavior is more confined, and thus computers don't really have any intelligence. What we're dealing with is a technology that I like to characterize as sort of an idiot savant technology. It's brilliant in terms of its ability to handle billions of segments, but it has no logic, no common sense. It will give you, if you put Spanish sentences in your Russian TM, it's going to sometimes think that sometimes Russian sentences look like Spanish. It has no ability to understand these kinds of things. So more granular and more focused your target domain is, the more likely that you get higher productivity. So again, the process for improving and building an engine is you customize, then you measure the quality, and then you run some translations through, you correct those translations, and you feed those corrections back. And you go through a few iterations of this before you put a system in production. And again, the way There's two different ways that you can improve the quality of an MT system. One is just by providing additional training data. Clean data systems will improve with small amounts of data. Dirty data systems need massive amounts of data. And there's also runtime improvements. So there's things that, once a system has been built, you can use a variety of tools, like in the Asia Online environment. There's many different kinds of runtime enhancements that you can do that normalizes terms so that terminology becomes more consistent. You can do even things like convert currencies, on the fly, so that, dollar amounts are converted into euro or yen or whatever it is you need. And this is where you really should be spending your time, rather than trying to get the data clean, which experts can do for you. And this is just a little bit more detail on some of the controls that are available that can be applied to machine translation engines. And then one of the questions that we often have is about quality, and in this industry we all know that it's very hard to have a meaningful discussion on translation quality, because everybody has an opinion, and so there are very few clear, objective things that can be said about translation quality. But one measure that I think matters more than everything else is that, do you get translation done that at a client acceptable level, faster and cheaper? Those are the things. There's many useful tools and metrics like the blue scores or the F measure and meteor or edit distance, and these are all have some value, but they should not be the real basis of why you use MT or why you do not. The best measure is, does it get work done faster? Does it get work done cheaper? Both of those need to be true for it to make sense. And so, this brings us to the concept of return on investment. So it's important to understand that, the money you spend in building an MT system and the money you save from building the MT system are the key determinants of whether it makes sense or not. This is a slide to make the point that there's always going to be someone who does it at a lower cost. But are you going to get what you want? You need to understand that there's a relationship between cost and quality. It's not like cars. We're still at a point in the technology where the range and the variation from the lowest quality solutions to the highest quality solutions is quite dramatic. So the total cost of ownership is, everything involved in terms of like all the effort and the tools and everything that you do to make something happen. And you need to make sure that you include all the costs. So that when you use something like Moses, have you factored in the cost of the time that you spend trying to figure out how to make it work? The amount of effort that you make, not knowing how to clean the data, but making random efforts, hoping that it will clean the data, and not really knowing if it did or not. The time and effort things often get left over or left out of the calculation. So it's important to make sure that you have a comprehensive human resource, technical resource, and operational resource sense. And the productivity gains and the profit margins are the most tangible returns of effective MT use. And there's also intangible returns. You get new kinds of projects. And once a client knows that you can do things at very low cost at reasonable quality, they will quite likely feed new kinds of business to you that they would not, or new projects that they just wouldn't have attempted had MT not been an option that was available. It can also help you win business away from competitors, because once you have a really good MT engine in place, it's very hard for your client to move from one vendor to another. they will want to stay with the vendor with the good efficient system, because that vendor is going to get the work done faster and is going to get it done cheaper at a quality level that is consistent. So here's an example of a 950,000 word project, using a calculator that we make available, that Asia Online makes available, and then if you send me an email, I'd be happy to give you access to this. That shows you, with your very specific inputs, what the cost might be. So here's a human, this is a human plus MT approach, that factors in all the MT costs, all the development costs, and shows you that, basically here at the cost level, yeah, it is going to be cheaper. You're going to spend more money on editing because MT output is not as good as TM output. And, and while I use TM as an analogy, I understand that MT errors are different, but there's still enough value in a decent MT output that you could still get something out of it. And here's this ROI calculator, this time thing, that shows you that you get things done faster in terms of man days, total man days. Shows you that you get work done faster. And, this is why people do it. And here's an example with an actual customer of ours who shared data with us. And they requested that they remain anonymous. It was in a Slavic language too. And where they showed that over time, the projects produced more margin, and they became more and more efficient, because once they learned how to use the system, things, so this is when MT is used properly, when you have systems that produce usable output, you are going to find that this will be the net impact of it. So here's a case study of a German to Slovenian technical engineering domain. There was a project of around 1 million words. This customer, Iola, had spent 6 months, hired a computational linguist, had a bunch of people working on trying to produce an MT system. They were unable to get a system that was even close to the Google one. I believe they just actually made a presentation last month in Riga at the ELIA conference about their experience, about all the problems they ran into. And then with Asia Online, we were, when you're working with experts, we were able to zero in very quickly on those things that mattered the most. And we were able to produce, things that matter to them. So here's Slovenian is a heavily inflected language. Common issue that they ran into was that the correct term was being translated, but the incorrect inflected form. There are ways you can handle that. And the Asia Online technology, the language studio stuff helps you work through that. And the net result was they had a working engine in just a few weeks. The quality was immediately usable. Terminology was very consistent. The customer was very happy. In terms of just blue scores, the engine was dramatically better than Google and Microsoft. And just after one round of post-edits, the system went up another 4 blue points. So when you know what you're doing, this kind of thing can happen. So, here's Simon Bertina in his own words, that some of the very technical segments were the same quality as human translation. And probably a little bit more consistent, because, it is possible to make a 1 million word project use the same terminology for all 1 million words. Here's another case where there were very limited data resources and relatively tough languages for another LSP customer. So English to Spanish, Russian, Japanese, and Indonesian. It was in the food preparation domain. They had very little TM. But the good thing in this situation was, since it was about food preparation, we were able to find a lot of monolingual data in that subject domain. There are tons of sites about cooking, about food preparation in all those languages, and we learned from that, and we determined what needed to be in the system to be able to get to a level that would be to add to the productivity rather than detract from the productivity. You can the link below will give you more details about that specific one. Here's another case where the customer had a very elaborate and very detailed process using SAE J2450, where they compared an Asia Online system to a legacy MT system, which in this case I think was developed by Language Weaver, and they found that the Asia Online system was dramatically better. Post editing was faster. Everything that mattered was fast, was better. And in this case, 52% of the raw output from Asia Online had no errors at all, and immediately could go into a system. So, important point I'm trying to make here is that all MT engines are not equal. That some engines are better, and that if you're flying a 747 with 300 passengers on board, you have the pilot there needs to have more skill than the guy who's cutting your lawn, or someone who's just driving from here to the grocery store. So there's different tools you need, and there's a whole sequence of capabilities that are necessary to have a successful experience with machine translation, and this is one of the high value adds of working with somebody like Asia Online. Also very important to understand the human factors, because we've seen cases where very good MT engines don't succeed because there were very poor communications between the key players. It's important that project managers, the post editors, and the translators all understand what's going on, that they all have some say. You provide lots of editing examples, get MT output to acceptable levels before you start expecting people to post edit it. If you give them garbage, you're going to create a hostile environment that people don't want to work with. The translator blogs are filled with feedback about negative MT post-editing experiences. Good post-editing experiences are not so different from working with translation memory. And so you need to get, while the errors are different, translation memory, lower matches have different kinds of errors, but the fact that there's enough correct already done that makes the process easier, and that someone can get 9,000 words a day done, without breaking a sweat. It's important that you get your system as good as possible before you involve human beings in the process to clean up. Very critical thing is to establish fair and reasonable compensation. That the ALT people did a great job in involving translators in the process and helping and using them to help set rates. That where it was a win-win scenario where there were, the company was able to reduce their costs and the translators were actually making more money. It's important to train the editors. It's important to share information in this process. And, this is where many projects succeed and fail. So, while there's only one slide on this, it's one of the most important ones. So as, in closing, I'm just saying that as you learn to use MT, you expand the reach of where translation can go. And you can reach deeper and deeper into organizations and into where it really matters, into customer conversations, into customer impressions and sentiments, and have product groups communicate more directly with actual customers to understand what actual customers are saying in different languages, because they're all talking about their experiences with your products, with global, with any company that is selling products on a global basis. There's a discussion going on in many, many languages. So good MT will allow you to get to more of the market, in a way that is just not possible with human beings alone. I hope I stayed within the time frame here, and I thank you. I have a blog, which has not been so active of late, but there's good stuff there, and I recommend that you take a look. Many of the things I've talked about today are covered in some detail there. I'm active on Twitter, and I'm also the moderator of an MT group in LinkedIn that has about 4,000 members. And I welcome your questions and any feedback you have. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to summarize. There were lots of new data. So today we've heard that machine translation, the best fine-tuned system can reduce the terms by 4 times and cost by 2 times. But even if you are able to deal with it, it's not a fact that you manage it, because as we've seen with ILR, if you get the wrong, if you put the wrong data or the errors creep in, you might not be better than Google Translate. And all efforts on fine-tuning machine translation, you see that you have the specialized project with engineers and data. So maybe someone wants to make another conclusion. If you have any questions from the audience, but you have to ask questions in English. Does anyone have questions? Come on. Fyodor, you might ask something.
My name is Fyodor Bezrukov. I've seen a case study about translation into Russian. We are mostly interested in English into Russian and Ukrainian language pairs. Do you have any more info, maybe case studies or successful stories concerning these language pairs? Thank you.
I don't have specific stories I can tell you about Russian, but we have worked with several other languages that are similar, that have a great deal of inflection, like Slovenian, like Hungarian, like Czech, and we will use the same kinds of strategies for a language like Russian, where we expect we would get similar results. We do have a few Russian language customers, but they have asked that their information not be shared in any way. So I can't really talk more about it, but I'd be happy to talk to you specifically, about what you're trying to do, to see, if we can or cannot help.
I have a question. In Russia, I think we have like 4 LSPs out of 1,000 or 2,000 that actually try to perform projects doing machine translation. Maybe 5 out of 2,000. In Ukraine, it's quite the same, and maybe even less. So practically none of the LSPs are doing projects with machine translation and post-editing. At the same time, we see that big international players like eBay and TripAdvisor, they start to use MT for user-generated content, and we see them use MT from English to Russian. So the question is, do you have any data on MT adoption? What's going on? What percentage of enterprise clients are using MT right now? And what percentage of LSPs actually perform post-editing machine translation?
I think we are still at a point where machine translation is not widely used. It is very heavily concentrated in terms of usage in the information technology industry. So all the big IT companies like Microsoft, HP, Intel, IBM, they are all very heavy users of MT because they produce a lot of information that cannot go through, traditional translation channels. There's so much information that they have to use MT for their knowledge bases, if nothing else. Among LSPs, we are seeing now more and more. I mean, some of the examples I have given in my presentation are very small LSPs. And I think you will see that many of the more technologically adventurous LSPs will start to use MT as a way to build an advantage in certain industries. And once you have a good system in place, you have a long-term cost advantage for translation in that industry. So I think it's a wise action for many LSPs to follow. But it's always easier to do in Romance languages. If you're dealing with English, it's much easier to do French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. Those are the easiest ones. So you see more experiments there. You see very few experiments in Asian languages and Slavic languages, much more complicated, much more difficult. So you need much more skill to be successful.
Yes, the cost is higher too. And so the next question is, what's an LSP has to gain from starting performing post-editing? Do you know what kind of profitability this business brings compared to traditional TAP? How much it will cost to start doing post-editing, and what will be the profit?
Yeah, I mean, some of the data I presented in my presentation was directly from customer, case studies. So it will always depend on the engine. The better the quality of the MT engine, the higher the profitability, the higher the margin, because you will get things done faster, and the same translator that was working at 1,000 words a day can now produce 12,000 words a day, and you pay them less, but they get paid more because they're completing more. So, I mean, in many cases, we're seeing when you have 100% to 300% improvement in productivity, you will increase. I mean, I have one of the slides actually showed the margins of a specific customer with a Slavic language. So you should definitely. I cannot give you a one number that is representative. It varies, but it is always at least 10-15% more, sometimes 30-40% more. It varies on the quality of the engine. So each engine is a new adventure. We can predict that with some with some languages the rate of success is very high, like Spanish or Portuguese, and some languages it's harder. Russian is one of the harder languages, and so you need more skill, more time to get good engines, but it's possible.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Max. I'm from Moscow Translation Agency. What do you think, what is the minimum size of a project when it makes sense to use MT? Say, is it 1,000,000 words, or is it when you have some project like 300 words, does it make sense to use MT, or is it too small for MT effort?
Yeah, MT always makes more sense when you are going to use it for large volume or for repeated use. Like you have a project that comes every 3 months, every 6 months, and it's relatively large. So that's why you see, like in the automotive industry, there is very heavy usage of MT, because when they produce service manuals, these are 3,000 pages long, there is maybe 50% overlap, but 50% are new words. So they have to get through those, for 3,000 pages, 50% of that is a lot of data. And they do, every time there's a new model in the car, they have to do this again. So it depends on, so MT makes most sense if you're going to use it more than once. You should not think of MT as a project, tool. It's really a production tool for a long-term focus. So rather than say, oh, I've got one project from Toyota, so I'm going to build an MT engine, it's better to say that I want to focus on the automotive industry, and I want to work with many companies in the automotive industry, and I'm going to specialize and build a very comprehensive MT engine that will help me win business across all automotive companies. So I think that is the kind of thinking that is new. It's people who, when they think of translation memory, always say that it's very project focused. With MT, it's a production line. It's like you're building a factory, and a factory only makes sense if you're going to produce a lot of products there, or you're going to produce them continuously, or on a regular basis at least. Even if it's not used day to day, but when you get a project, it's large, and you know that you're going to get many projects. So, you build an automotive engine, and then you build one for Honda, one for Toyota, one for Mercedes, one for BMW, And that is how you will get the maximum value in terms of your investment and in terms of just your ability to very quickly adjust for large customers like that.
Thank you. And one more question. Do you think the results of a successful MT project in one domain can be somehow stored and applied to when switching to other domains? When I understand that terminology may change, but if the language pair is the same, can we keep some patterns of grammar structures, inflections, and so on, and make the next project easier?
Yes, you know, once you have an engine, so you have an automotive engine, the automotive engine will probably be useful for domains that are relatively close by, you know, so maybe some industrial engineering or some other kinds of, you know, where you need new terminology. So you have to add the new terminology. You have to add whatever linguistic style things that are, you know, to this. But you could not use an automotive engine foundation for, say, travel. It is too different. Or for cosmetics. You know, the language style, there are so many differences that it may not be useful. I mean, we have strategies of finding, okay, what is just basic linguistic information? And we can extract that, which is what data we call foundation data. Foundation can be used anywhere. But all the specific domain stuff, you should remove for the best results. So for example, if you had an automotive engine and you can use it for many automotive companies, and then you say, okay, now some travel companies are asking me for business. We would probably discard 75, 80% of the automotive engine and start with a new foundation that is more similar to what you need in travel. You know, when you describe a hotel, when you describe a tourist site, when you describe travel routines and, you know, all the tourist information, very different language from automotive. So you don't want to mix those to get the best results, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Kirti. I don't think we have any more questions, and it was a very illuminating presentation. We're happy that you joined us for this session, even though it's very late at your time zone, I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you.